Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, with all this talk about decorum, culture, what is art, what is freedom of speech, Western values, all around Charlie Kirk's death and how some have responded, and censorship, and things like that, I decided to just give a small snippet into what are many of us raised on. I'm a 90s kid, and I grew up watching a lot of horror movies. And my grandma was a big horror movie fan. She had a vast collection. So, I think it's interesting that a country that produces vast amounts of morbid, dark humor and entertainment should not pearl clutch around some people laughing that someone was assassinated. We eat popcorn and watch people get shanked. We have become desensitized, but we also have become a bit callous. And I know there's a conversation around, oh, well, you can differentiate between those things. But we watch it and we crave more. We get used to it. We become, I don't want to say leveled up, but we become less disturbed, and our eyes don't look away as much as they should. So, let me give you an example of this movie. It's a classic one. It's Halloween, and I used to celebrate Halloween before I was Muslim. It was a fun time for me. I used to dress up and scare people. I went and got candy, and I would toilet paper people's trees and throw apples at people, and we would explore abandoned houses. We were the typical stereotype Americana. This movie was watched by tons of children, and I know there's going to be someone who says, well, why don't your parents watch you? That's like what happens today with social media. Kids are going to watch movies, and there's always going to be somebody's parents who doesn't care, and we're going to watch it over there. The point is, America allowed these films to make money, to be made, and to be promoted, right? And I want to show, I know the slippery slope fallacy isn't liked by a lot of people, but it goes from piece to piece to piece. And it's all connected. This is a horror movie. This guy shanks this woman. And there was like 1 and 2, but this one really laid it in. And it has a classic soundtrack that I don't think the new generations are watching it, right? But at least for me and then those who were around when it came out, you heard the sound and you knew what movie it came from. And it was really intense. His face mask would always be in the Halloween stores. You'd go into the Halloween stores and today you go into a Halloween store, it's not like it was in the 90s. Like, they actually had really cool costumes and Halloween was taken more seriously. And you would go to your neighbor's house and it was way more festive and you had a lot of trust. Today, it's just not the same. Kind of like how Christmas is more corporatized. But you would always see his mask hung up on, like, the rows where you could get something scary. And everyone could recognize it. It became part of American cinema. Kids would hide and then jump out at each other and feel like, whoa, I gotcha. And then his clothing even became iconic. It was something that really resonated with children and really made Halloween even all the more spooky. During Halloween, it was normal to want to be afraid. We liked that feeling of being afraid. And pranks today were not the same as back then, where it actually had more of a punch. With watching endless TikTok reels of pranks, things were not as scary. Halloween was revolutionary for its time. Ingenious about the marketing as well is the jack-o'-lanterns, because all of us kids would carve a face. Some would do the standard happy, but they use the grumpy face, the angry face, in their marketing, and then the kitchen blade. And so this also helped people to remember the film, and people could identify it. And you have to remember, Blockbuster, things were more of, you could just walk down the aisles and see every single horror movie, and we judged a movie by its cover. And we didn't get to see really a preview. Like, you go on Netflix, you watch a trailer. Back in those Blockbuster days, you looked at the cover, and the cover had to bring you in. And so this was an iconic imagery for those of us who got to grow up with it. I watched this film a lot as a kid, and there was the iconic face mask. I wore it once for Halloween, and it had a cable attached to it and a fake heart, so that when you squeezed it, fake blood would squirt from the mask, and I would chase my sister around my grandma's house. So I was not that nice. But you have to understand, these movies were like pivotal to growing up in American society. Horror movies are part of Western values. And so if we can eat popcorn and sip on Coca-Cola, have a Mountain Dew, eat some Doritos, and watch people have perilous ends, how truly can we get offended and pearl clutch when a real assassination takes place that it was dark to see, but we've seen worse, and we like to watch worse? The movie became so iconic that, just like the Michael Myers mask, when you saw it, you would know what it's from. And there was even comedy parodies as well that made funny snippets from this film. And I would also argue that people make this face even in memes of that mask. And I once made a face mask in ceramics of the Scream mask, but I added math symbols all over it and said math kills, like math is horrifying. That was before I was Muslim, but people could identify and be like, oh, I remember that film. Like, it was very common. And so you gotta understand how families would gather around and watch this. And today, people do that while they play video games or whatnot. So Western values is horror movie values. It's the ability for people to sit down and watch entertainment that disturbs them, intrigues them, and where there's suspense and fear. Americans love fear. That's why, if you notice with the right-wingers, fear really sells to them, and that's part of a lot of cultural conditioning, I'd argue. Classic movie is Hannibal with Anthony Hopkins. Wonderfully acted. A classic, and I think that it's a very unique film for its time. But it's dark and raw. He's a cannibal, but he has this eloquent style to him that was very unique in cinema. And Anthony Hopkins played his role quite well. And he goes to Italy, and there's a detective there, and he does a gruesome thing to the detective. It's just fascinating how they were able to portray this character, but tons of Americans watched it, and Anthony Hopkins has played in quite a lot of movies. And you have to remember, Americans, if there's a certain actor, we will watch the film because we're familiar with the skills of that actor. And so Hopkins was able to sell this character to the American public, and we would make the sounds of what he does all the time. And though we didn't call them memes, but they were like verbal memes, and people would know. It was a cultural phenomenon. Lambs with Anthony Hopkins this is the first movie. Hannibal is the second. And I've seen even moms use this as a meme for, like, when you think your toddler's sleeping and they're not, and you look in the room and they're standing like that. And it's just fascinating how, I don't want to say lovable, but how much a character that was so gruesome and dark became just iconic, like Michael Myers, like the Scream mask. Again, we watched this man be intelligent scary and artistic and gruesome, but also merciful towards Clarice. And this is why a culture that fosters this type of atmosphere, I don't think can really pearl clutch to the degree that is being done. His mask was also quite intriguing because he couldn't do what he wanted to do, and if he didn't have a mask on, he'd bite. And in the movie, there's a video where he bites up a nurse. And so, when you have sort of brutality pumped into children from a young age as entertainment, it enlightens the viewer, prepares them for what is possible. It gives us an insight into human psychology, but at the same time, you cannot then turn around to the masses and say, don't you dare laugh, as they go and to the mall, get some snacks, and watch something like this on the big screen. I would see this DVD on my grandma's, like where she kept her movies and whatnot, and that little locust moth thing was placed in the mouth of the victims that Buffalo Bill would flay, and he would create clothing out of those women. And so the title also, Silence of the Lambs, was a question that Hannibal posed to her, to Agent Starling, Clarice, when she tried to rescue a baby lamb and it didn't work, and how lambs will sometimes scream, and if you open the fence they won't run away, and how it sounds really human when they scream, and that would give her nightmares. And that's kind of her origin story. And so he would ask her, have the lambs stop screaming, and there's this whole mental game he plays with her. And so it's a dark movie, but one that is part of American culture. You can see how Hannibal and Silence of the Lambs has been put together, and in this fan's depiction of it, in the background you see when he went to Italy, what he did to the prison guard. You see Buffalo Bill there, and today you'll hear people call the trans Buffalo Bill because of that. Even Joe Dirt, that comedy, did a Buffalo Bill segment, and people who watched Joe Dirt knew what it was talking about because it's from this movie. Again, horror movies are as American as apple pie. When you look at the rawness of the film, it really can make you think about what's going on in other places in the world and what evil is, the faces it wears. And this film had a lot of left and right turns. It also kind of showed to me personally why women should not be in law enforcement like that. And the villain was very strange, and at that time people didn't really know much about that group, so I find it fascinating today that conversation is getting brought up again, because who took out Charlie Kirk, and it is reported that he had a trans lover. So sometimes you'll see people use the Buffalo Bill slur towards those cross-dressing eunuchs, and it's a movie that was ahead of its time, and it was serious business. I remember watching this movie, and it was very intense. And a movie like this, Carrie, it struck people who were outcasts in school and really brought up bullying and misery, and so revenge, right? This is the horror theme of revenge. Like, you take someone who's nice and then they lash out. It's an intense film, but I really want you to understand American culture, American cinema. That way, you understand what people would call freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and what Hollywood was allowed to do, and how people change once this becomes part of the zeitgeist. It becomes part of the ecosystem. Now, there's been several versions of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it is a movie that's quite dark. And I remember watching it, and you can get chills, and it's really raunchy. But lots of Americans have watched it, and we have a high threshold for what we think is scary or not. And some argued it was based on a true story. Others debate that. But the fact of the matter is that it really normalized chainsaw stuff. Kind of like how Scarface also had that scene where Al Pacino's in the bathroom and then that guy comes in and takes out his friend, right? It really was just something very different, to where I once went to a cornfield and a corn maze for Halloween, and they had people with masks on that would chase you around with a chainsaw, but it had the chain off, but it would make the noise. And this was like a big thing at the time. The Shining is a classic that has also been memed. Even I meme it a lot, especially with the when he kicks down the door. But it is a very dark film. He's in this hotel. Hotel has this sort of evil aura to it, and there's just so much spookiness. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, but it is another one that people know so well. And when you have these horror movie directors, such as Stanley Kubrick, who are able to create psychological thrillers and really get you to think, it changes the brain patterns of you in a way. Because now you have a palette for the art of horror. When I took an aesthetics class for philosophy, my teacher, he also liked horror movies, and we would talk about it. And when you get around people who have watched a lot of horror films, what we find funny, what we find entertaining is going to be different. But the point is, countless Americans have watched this, and one might argue maybe that's why so many people are into the military, or don't have shyness of joining the military, because we've been conditioned and programmed to like a little bit of gore. It was really unique for its time, and it really made people wonder about justice. The main character, his wife was pregnant. Junkie loser runs out of the office building or something, and the door smashes on the woman's belly, and she loses her baby, unfortunately, and this creates his villain arc. So Saw was really good at evoking the villain arc. He was able to bring in contraptions and mechanisms that seemed like they were from the medieval period. I don't know how much is true from the medieval period of the devices that they used. Some say it was exaggerated, others say no. But some have speculated this is what made the founding fathers in America decide that you cannot do cruel and unusual punishment. Because that is just wrong, they felt. Because it changes the one who does it. And if people have that kind of conditioning, what will they become? Jeepers Creepers was a strange film that could have been better, but the song was Jeepers Creepers, where'd you get those eyes? And it was okay. I would give it a 2, actually, if I really think about it. The monster was not that great, but our vernacular, oh, that gives me the Jeepers. You'll see that even in Scooby-Doo cartoons. So this was another horror movie that many of us would have watched. Every picture I'm showing you is a movie I've watched. Unique about this filming style was it felt like a vlog, and it was spooky, and it looked amateur, but for me, it was, had some different elements, and there was notoriety and whatnot, but there was novelty for sure. But we would also be like, oh, woods, the darkness, someone being afraid and holding the camera too close to their face. Kind of reminds you of today with certain vloggers and whatnot. But remember, there was a TikToker who during the shooting of Charlie Kirk, they were like, oh, like and subscribe, blah, 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 blah. They promoted themselves, and people were like, how would someone even think of that? But you have to understand, what is the American diet? The Candyman was a really creepy film, but we would often scare ourselves by going in the bathroom and saying his name. And some gangbangers would also give themselves the nickname of that, and some drug dealers as well. So it was a strange film, but at least it had the novelty of insects. Sometimes get mad at Muslims for not liking dogs, but then they kind of forget how we also have tons of movies about dogs or canines, wolf dog creature things attacking people. And rabies was a problem in the past, and so one could argue they created more dog horror films to kind of get people more aware of training your dog, keeping up with their shots, vetting rescue dogs properly, and making sure leash laws were enacted. On 3, The Hangman's Daughter was a movie I watched so much. And there's an iconic scene where, one lady's dancing and she's quite beautiful, but she turns into a scary vampire. And vampires were a huge thing. And this was like spooky because no one suspected the vampires, but we watched, like, the main character goes in this saloon, and it's pretty graphic. You know what I mean? They get locked inside. And all the attractive women turn into these scary, ugly creatures. I mean, it's pretty gnarly. This one was an okay film, but it was more towards a younger audience, I'd argue, rather than seasoned horror fans, because it did a lot with, like, I saw you. You guys are trying to have a secret, but I know. To me, it reminds me of, like, blackmail in a way, and how long can a secret stay within a group? I've argued this movie is a satire. I don't really see it, even though it has dark gallows humor. But a man who does terrible things to women who sell themselves is pretty standard in horror. But what was different about him is the polished aspect. And there's something about, just like with Hannibal Lecter, where the character is smart yet evil, that seems to really make people afraid. Whereas when you have a Jeepers Creepers, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Michael Myers, and there's a face mask, this can kind of disassociate you from the character because it's, like, less realistic. But with this character, he focused on font on business cards, and he had wealth, and he could get beautiful women, but he was just a psycho. And notice how it says American Psycho, and you will see lots of young men use his icon in the MGTOW incel movement. The movie Psycho is like one that the shower scene where he goes after the woman is, and the music has been used for the shower scene in countless films. But he was a character who had a weird relationship with his mom, and he would often dress up as his mom and then have conversations with himself, and he ran a hotel on the and I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, but again, it was shot in black and white because that's how it was back then. But this was a key moment in the American cinematic history because this is a woman traveling alone, right? It's a woman who was a thief, and she's hoping to get away, and she didn't get away. So it brings up a lot of feelings and disconcerting aspects of our own psychology. Of you can travel, and you got to be really careful with who you meet. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho really also hinted at what women fear, because when you're in the shower and you hear your baby cry, you're like, oh, I get so much anxiety. There's a terrible feeling of vulnerability in the shower, and this really led a lot of women to locking their bathroom doors. So again, horror movies have shaped female behavior and have made people more aware and really broken through taboos. The Purge is more modern, but it really gets at when you allow a society to release the pressure and just have some melees and chaos and anarchy and what they'll do, and that it becomes part of a customary tradition. That was a unique premises, because if you think about the ancient Romans having the Colosseum, people watching the Aztecs having their sacrifices, you can see how humans, they seem to crave some type of anarchy, some type of gore. And The Purge was like that. Not all the Purge movies are good, but the concept was there. That Laura Loomer, just kidding. She looks just like that. But this is a character who, you know, for the Saw series was quite unique, kind of like how Chucky was. Pet Cemetery was also trippy because it got into graveyards and animal evilness, and it had involved a kid. You know, I won't spoil it for you, but it was also quite unique for its time, and it was disturbing. So Stephen King was really good at this film. But again, reminder, everything I've shown you up to now is pretty standard. I'm not even getting into the niche stuff here of what millions of Americans have watched. The Exorcist was a classic. People have memed it, but that got into like spiritual fear, and it was tough on the child actor, but it made people very aware of, you know, darkness, and disturbed them to their core. The Ring has also been memed. The Ring wasn't that good. Didn't have a very unique premise. But sometimes you'll see people say like, oh, she looks like the Ring character. But it has this sort of videotape, and like, you know, it gets into cross dimensions in a way. And if you watch this tape, you'll get this curse. Like, it's, you know, there's potential. But it wasn't as good as it could have been. But that's another classic film as well. There's a classic series called Tales from the Crypt. And so many kids would watch this stuff. And I think there was some lessons to be learned in the show. But what I'm trying to really show you here is a lot of Americans are more comfortable with death than they like to admit. It's just how close are they to that person. But from every death, from every tragic thing, there's a lesson that we were told to learn from it. So same with Kirk's death, there's a lesson to be learned from it, an analysis, right? So it's fascinating watching such a huge wave of cancellations when the American diet is way more into darkness than many would admit. In The Shining, there is a scene where there's a creepy lady in the bathtub, and you also get to see this man's spiral into madness, and nature is really used within the film. That maze outside the wintry hotel that kind of gets into when you're isolated and the weather is combined. But what he does, how he behaves with his family, is very troubling, and how the little boy goes, red rum, and the use of the twins, the hallways that flood with blood, is a very intense film. When I watched this as a kid, it really made you afraid of certain types of dolls. And that's what was unique about this horror film. It turned toys, instead of items of comfort, into items of scariness. If you think of Toy Story, right, the toys come to life for good things. This did the opposite of such a thing, where the toy is becoming scary and alive and wants to hurt you, and where people's souls get trapped into dolls. Okay, now there are some horror films where there's some type of doll that has a little bonnet and a little dress, but this was something much different, and plenty of children were terrified and would tease each other with the doll. I was a big fan of the Sweeney Todd movie with Johnny Depp, and I, at that time, was quite goth. I would wear black every day. I dyed my hair black, wore black, mascara, black eyeliner, dark eyeshadow, and I went through a goth phase and saw a lot of my own personality in the character Sweeney Todd. What is interesting about this film is it just highlights Tim Burton being a huge part of American cinema. The Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse's Bride, those are more softer versions, but there is this angle in America of gloom, melancholy, comfortableness with death. And what was great about this film was the meat pie point, where they're serving people, but in the form of meat pies. And it has a greediness to it, yet they're singing. So Johnny Depp really brings out the best in this character, sort of like how he was unique in Edward Scissorhands. He comes across as unique in this. He's a very diverse actor, and he did a great job in this role. And so this was just another movie that became part of the lexicon. Lost Boys was a classic. These young men with their own unique fashion who are vampires. And it really gets into the struggle of adolescence, and they had one of the young lads becomes a vampire. There's a lot of angles here, and it captures America in that time period, which is great. And the song that goes, people are strange, do 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 do, when they're strange, do do do, people come out in the rain, when they're strange, and it has like a whole scene. And the uncle, I believe it's the uncle, he has a bunch of stuffed animals, which kind of reminds me of myself, like a taxidermist. It's a great film, but it's vampires. And what are vampires? They really suck your blood, and then you become one of them. There's a lot of cryptic messaging in such a movie. These are men, and they are vampires. They have a leader who doesn't look like he would be a vampire. He looks like he would work at Office Depot, and he tries to get with the main character's mom. It's a really coming of an age story where be careful which groups you get involved in, because there will be consequences. And this also does a lot for what women at the time were attracted to. So there was a message of, hey, these men are attractive, so be careful. So evil can have an attraction to it. And I know some of us are reminded of that often, But this film did it in a way that was unique and is a movie that can stand on its own concerning the vampire genre. And so here we see attraction, gore, the vampires, they're white, they have long hair, style of the 80s, they encapsulate America at that time, and so this is all part of the long railroad of horror movies. Vampires and the Lost Boys, they have their own underground labyrinth, their own area where they kick it and hang out, and they seem cool to a lot of people, and they ride motorcycles, and they seem quite free. A lot of people at that time, in the 80s, it's reported, had that sort of creative rebellion. Anarchists, do what you want, break the taboos. And so, this movie really served to kind of get people to dress how they want, the styles to change, but also that evil can get itself in many different fashion senses. We have a culture that has created gore, horror, agony, suffering, suspense, and so many different contexts. We can't expect people to be falling over their heels and fainting because people have made assassination jokes, especially when we look at the scope of human cinema. What gets normalized? The American Horror Story series is one that's quite macabre. It's not for the faint of heart, and their intro is quite raunchy, I'd argue. It really can rub you the wrong way, and if it's difficult to watch it while sober, if people were smoking weed or doing drugs or being drunk, such a film would get a little bit too inside of their head. And the American Horror Story series, there's different ones, can really get inside of you and make you feel like, this is strange. But it also has a lot of moments where it gets philosophical about ethics. And you begin to see the creativity of the writers. The blonde woman has a sad kind of trajectory because she wants to stay young forever. And she doesn't want to lose her beauty and allure. Really gets into Louisiana, a certain genre of occultism that is expressing itself till this day in America, but kind of on the lower east side. So you have the East Coast, and you have Midwest, and you have the West Coast, and then Middle America. You got New Orleans down there, Louisiana, in essence. They have a very weird type of witchery, just like Texas does as well. Or Tijuana. It goes on and on. This series can make you uncomfortable, and it has a great actress on the right. And so America feeds this type of media to the masses, but wants you to pearl clutch. It's very difficult for people to separate themselves from the media that adds to their personality. It's like a seed that you water, but it's like a mystery seed. You don't exactly know what kind of fruit's gonna come out yet. Rosemary's Baby, to me, is quite sad because she gives birth to an evil baby, a demonic baby, and it's like every woman's nightmare, and it taps into a fear that many women have, the whole satanic cults and whatnot. And the way it's shot and the actress they used, it's really one that sits with you when you watch it. When it comes to vampires, America has produced quite a lot of movies and introduces lust and lots of neck shots. So it is strange, the sort of blood stuff that is all over American movies in particular. And so with that, the neck plays a whole angle in creative writing, in gore, in human anatomy. Just sit and think deeply about your neck and how important it is for breathing, for looking left to right. It's such an important part of you. When you think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed us, and the fact that the vampire consistently will go for the wrist or the neck, and they inject a sort of eroticism in that. So they mix gore and eroticism together, and when you interject lust, it makes it more welcoming to many. And if you notice, many women on Halloween, they like to dress up like a sexy vampire. Pretty scary for if you really look at that messaging. This woman's gonna literally suck the blood out of you as a man, and you're gonna change after. And once you get bitten, you really can't go back unless you take out the main vampire, and the main vampire hides itself so that their kind can continue to exist. Horror is a haunted house, and the haunted house genre is overplayed, but this movie had a really unique time with its whole plot and the character development and whatnot. But notice how they make large houses spooky, hospitals spooky. This is something that Americans like to do. We like to make haunted houses for Halloween to go in. We see a large home and we think, who died here? What is the stories within this hallway, within these corridors, within these rooms? And types of houses like this make noises because they're large, they're big, the window creaks, and when you're home alone, you get more anxiety than if you were in an apartment where you can see around every corner, right? And they knew how to tap into that. So the Amityville Horror was a different type of movie because how it evoked gore mixed in with the house itself. And people love including spirituality in horror films. And this was one movie that did that in classic Americana fashion. The series was unique because Kathy Bates was in it, and she has done wholesome things in her career, such as fried green tomatoes, and she has a great laugh. But now she got to have her debut as a villain, and she is a fan of this author. He gets hurt. She keeps him emaciated pretty much, or weakened, in a weakened state in her home, and she's obsessed with him, and she wants to control his writing, and it's very creepy, and she does quite a good job. But look at all, and this is not even the tip of the iceberg. We could do one just on rap lyrics alone, or heavy metal lyrics. But the point of all this is to say, how can you water such a garden and then expect some type of fruit to grow that isn't conducive to the soil? Each plant grows according to its environment, the soil, how much it's watered, what it's watered with, and its shade, the sunlight. You just think about all the symbolism around a garden. And you could think of that movie Sleepy Hollow. In classical literature, it has like stuffed heads inside. It's a satanic tree. It's a very rotten tree. And the headless horseman, he takes heads and then puts it inside the tree. There's a whole kind of cinematic universe and literary universe around that as well. He comes out of the grave and captures what he wills. And some say he has a pumpkin head. So again, there's a lot there. The point is that we've spent in this country many years getting people to think this way and that way, and to sit still and watch these things on screen, to wrestle with their uncomfortable feelings, to laugh where they will and be shocked where they will, and they were just merely meant to witness it and express themselves how they felt. So how can a culture like MAGA decide suddenly, out of the blue, we're gonna censor everyone because of their Charlie Kirk jokes? How can a nation that makes so much money from violent music and violent movies and, even video games that are violent are the most fun, to be quite honest. And you may be asking yourself, or shouting at your phone or your computer, wherever you're watching me from, well, you should be able to decompartmentalize. You have to understand that there's a digital world in this world. But we do know that when you read a certain amount of books, you level up, you expand your mind, you travel, you see things, you expand. And you don't exactly know where that's going to go. And when it comes to movies, when you've seen a certain threshold, or even one that just made you think, you become different inside. And so people can be horrified that people made a sticker that said debate this, and it has Charlie Kirk leaning to the left, and then there's a splat. Yes, it's a bit rude, okay? You shouldn't have done that, come on now. But at the same time, you're talking to people who dress up as serial killers for Halloween. Look at how many people, women in particular, write letters to serial killers, to murderers. This is the population you wish to lecture. It's quite absurd, if you ask me. Quite absurd. It's expecting so much from a population that you've slowly eroded over time. And if you cause your own people to be indifferent, how you cannot complain? How can you complain?